Good evening, everyone. I'm Shweta Milani. From past 5 days, I have conducted various INDASs. So on day one, we had started with introduction and the asset-related standards. After that, we covered the government grants, related parties, and operating segments. And in the past 3 days, we covered the most important standards. That those were financial instruments, consolidation, revenue recognition, deferred taxes, business combinations. So this is how we try to cover the indices in majority of the manner so that you have a grip over index and wherever you need any application, you have the knowledge of index. That was the main motive of this webinars. I tried in my best to simplify the standards in the extent possible. Today's agenda for our seminar is the fair value measurement standard. After that, we'll cover the share-based payments, and after that, we'll cover certain indices. Only difference between the Ind AS and Indian GAAP. So detailed coverage of those standards are not required because majority they are similar with the Indian GAAP. But I'll just focus on the differences so that on and whole you have a comfort over all the indices and you know what is the difference between the Indian GAAP and the Ind AS. So this is how we tried to cover all majority of the indices. And wherever you have any further requirement, we can discuss it thereafter. So, Ind AS 113, that is fair value measurement. This standard is relevant for understanding Ind AS, as well as there are certain people who are pursuing the valuation course. So, for the purpose of valuation course, also by the IBBI organization, the registered valuation course, for that purpose, also this standard is much relevance because one of the topic in that valuation courses Ind AS 113 or IFRS 13, which is a fair value measurement. So let's begin with what the standard is, what kind of guidance it has provided, what are the valuation methods given under the standard, what are the disclosure requirements as per the standard. With respect to the valuation exam, you get MCQs with theoretical part of the standard. And that is why understanding each and every part of the standard is very much relevant because you have to fill in the blank with the appropriate theoretical word or with the appropriate definition of a particular aspect or whatever it is or certain condition laid down under the standard. So that is why please try to understand the standard in much crisp manner. So let's begin with the introduction. So Ind AS 113 or IFRS 13, here this is a standard which is a single source standard. So what does it mean? Other indices, wherever they give reference to the fair value measurement, you have to come straight to Ind AS 113. So what they have done is instead of dividing the entire guidance in various standards, they have laid down one particular standard for the fair value measurement, and wherever any standard uses the word fair value, you have to compute the fair value in accordance with Ind AS 113. So this is a consolidated guidance for the purpose of measurement of fair value. Now to just list down which all standards have governed or which all standards have given fair value requirements. The first and foremost standard, financial instruments. It requires you to measure the assets and liabilities at fair value. Second standard is, say you can say investment property. You require disclosure of the fair value of investment property. After that, you have to, if you need to use the revaluation model, in that cases you require to compute the fair value. There are various ways or various locations at which you have to measure the fair value. But how to measure this fair value is a question. So that is why this standard governs how to measure the fair value, which methods to use, and after that, what kind of disclosures are to be given
Guys, we are trying for the audio problem. Stay tuned. 5 minutes.
तो लोगों को बहुत कुछ रेशो रहेगा तो चैट में डाल
Right.
चैट पे ध्यान
Yes.
हाँ एकदम तक तुमका फोन आ रहा मतलब कॉल बंद कर रहा है
Hello. Is everyone able to hear my voice? Yeah, and sorry for the inconvenience. Suddenly the currents went off. That is why we had a break in between, or the internet wasn't working in between. So, and anybody whoever faces an issue regarding the connectivity, please post it on the chat so that I can be able to view it. Because I don't understand whether the voices has gone or the video is gone if I'm delivering. So I can just see my slide deck. So that is why if you have any issues, just post it on the chats or somewhere. I'll be in touch. So previously, I'll just start over from the points that you have missed. Yeah. Is everyone able to hear me and see me right now?
Now
So
it
what
is
I was
fine.
saying,
Yes.
yeah. So what I was saying previously is in as per Ind AS 113, the fair value is the exit price. So we had various ways in which fair values could be computed. It could be how do you buy a new asset? It could be for how many years the asset would be used. There are various methods of computing a fair value. But the standard says that the fair value is the exit price. Is just you just remember this keyword that is exit price. After that, we would understand what is a market, what are the market participants, what is the asset and liability. So these are all concepts will be understood here in after ahead. But the key part is about the computation of fair value is remembering it is a exit price. Then further, what I was discussing is, or what I had previously discussed is, so that whoever has missed, they can recollect or they can come back to the points again. So further, what I was saying is in your valuation exams, you have MCQs, you have theoretical MCQs based on all these concepts. They ask what is a fair value. So they give options. It is exit price. It is a new purchase of asset. Third option is it is of what you call replacement cost. There are various options which they give. Unless you remember this key terminology, so you won't be able to answer those questions. So for the persons who are giving the valuation exam, your main important 10 to 12 marks, I guess, are dependent upon this standard. So moving ahead to the next part, what is asset or a liability? So asset or a liability in accordance with Ind AS 113 can be standalone assets or liabilities, or it can be a group of assets or liabilities. Okay, so as per the standard, they have said that it can be, you can measure this fair value of a standalone asset, or whereas it can be as a group of asset. But why they have specified this? If you remember the impairment standard, in impairment standard, that is Ind AS 36, which is similar to the Indian GAAP, they have said that you have to mandatorily prepare a CGU, a cash generating unit. And CGU, they have given a method in which the CGU can be computed. So there's a concept of CGU. But whereas in this standard, that is Ind AS 113, there is a concept of you can either measure the fair value as per the standalone assets, or you can measure the fair value as per the group of the assets or liabilities. That is the main thing. Secondly, whenever do you compute the fair value, any kind of conditions attached to that asset which might change the fair value of the asset, any kind of restrictions attached to the asset, any kind of value, or because of the location of the asset, the value might change. In such cases, those parameters also have to be kept in mind. So I'll give you a classic example. A particular entity XYZ holds or had received a land from a particular government entity. So government organization had given them a land on grant basis. Okay, but the condition attached to that land was this land has to be used for manufacture of oils and engines only. Other than manufacturing of oils and engines, this land cannot be used for any other purposes. Whichever buyer will use this land has to manufacture and sell oils and engines only. He has to be in the business of oils and engines. Now, this is a condition which is attached to the land. You cannot separate this land from this condition attached, because this is how the ownership of the land is driven. And it has been said that if any of this condition is not followed by the buyer, then the government has a right to take back this land. Now, when I'm measuring the fair value of this land, I have to consider this condition attached to the asset, because this condition is not separable from the asset. It is not specific to my buyer. It is not specific to that particular company only. Whoever is going to buy that asset has to follow for this condition, and the condition is only the business of oils and engines will be done on this asset, and no other business can be done. So this is how it will be covered. So this is about the condition and the location of the asset. So since these conditions are attached to the asset, or these are the peculiarities of that particular asset, that is why you have to take the cognizance of these peculiarities for the purpose of measuring the fair value. Second thing, if anything is there about the location of the asset. Now, even in Pune itself, if you have a flat in a Kothur location, or if you have a flat in Wagholi location, in that cases the fair value differs. Now, in such cases, you have to take in cognizance the location of the asset also, because you cannot separate the asset from its location. You cannot apply the fair value of Kothur property to the property located at Wagholi. So because of the location, because of the condition of the asset, because of any other restrictions attached to that asset, the fair value might differ, and you have to take the cognizance of such kind of restrictions, of such kind of locations, of such kind of conditions attached to that asset. Please remember this, because when you measure the fair value, you will get the difference. If I'm measuring a fair value of the land, in that cases you have to take cognizance of where the land is located. Is it an agricultural land? Is it a non-agricultural land? Have the permissions for the purpose of converting from agriculture to non-agriculture, have they been carried in a smooth manner or not? If they're not carried in smooth manner, any point in time, government can raise a question on the activities conducted on the land. So these are the cases. So any particular characteristics of the asset which are specific to the asset have to be taken into cognizance when you decide the fair value of the asset. Let's go on to the second concept, which is what is a transaction and which is the most advantageous market. So moving ahead to the next part, which is what is a principal market or what is a most advantageous market. The standard Ind AS 113 says that a principal market is a market where the assets and liabilities are exchanged in an orderly transaction. Okay, the principal market is a market where there is a greatest volume or a greatest level of activity. So wherever the maximum level of activity takes place, that is a principal market. Now, in cases where the principal market is not available, in such cases you can go to the most advantageous market. What is the most advantageous market? Most advantageous market is a market where you get the maximum price for that particular asset, or there is a minimum price for that particular liability. So let's understand the difference with an example. Principal market is a market which has the greatest level of activities. So it means that, for example, if you have NSE and BSE, both this market have a orderly transactions which take place. Now, if you want to fair value a particular equity share, from where will you compute the fair value? From where will you compute the fair value in such cases? You have NSE also and you have BSE also. In such cases, what will you do is, you will compute what is the volume on each particular market for that particular share. If I'm measuring the fair value of say 5 equity shares. In such cases, if I'm measuring the fair value of 5 particular shares, in such cases, you have to see into, just a moment. Just a moment, we'll just resolve a technical issue. You can. ये तो on करो. Yeah. So Virag, can you be on the? Are you able to see my screen? So I've shared the screen of. We are on to the two of three of the slides. Are you able to see my screen? Virag? Just a moment, participants. We are just resolving this. So Virag, which slide are you able to see? Are you able to see 2 of 3 slide?
No, only one introduction.
Okay, only one introduction.
First slide, I mean introduction slide.
Because I have shared, or I am into 2 of 3 slide.
I think you should, log out and log in again. That will be
okay.
better.
Fine. I'll just log out and log in again. बट ये वाला एक फिक्स स्लाइड वो ऑटोमेटिकली ले रहा है।
वो ना इंट्रोडक्शन का स्लाइड फिक्स ले रहा है ऑटोमेटिकली, वो क्यों ले रहा है वही समझ में नहीं आ रहा। ठीक है, पहले अभी तो ऑडियो फिर सर आपके यहाँ से ना श्वेता को प्रेजेंटर बनाओ ना, देयर इज नो प्रेजेंटर ऐसे आ रहा है। हाँ यस 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 ओके ओके चलो। नहीं पता नहीं कुछ इशू हो रहा है आज।
Are you able to see my screen of fair value considerations? 2 of 3. Yeah. So what we were discussing is what is a market. So for the purpose of market, we discussed the two concepts. That was a principal market, and thereafter we discussed the most advantageous market. So what are these two particular concepts? The standard says that if you have a principal market, you have to for sure go to the principal market. And what is a principal market is? A market in which the major volume or level of activity is carried for that particular asset or liability. To take an example for this concept or to understand this concept of principal market, the standard says that, or for example, I'll just give you an example before. Now you have two markets, which is NSE and BSE. Now major level of activities are carried on both the markets. These two both are popular markets. Now what to do in such cases? Where the majority of the volume or level of activity is carried, that will be considered as the major, or that will be considered as the principal market. And in case if you have a principal market, you need not go into the second part, which is the most advantageous market. इसको देखने की भी जरूरत नहीं है इधर. So principal market, then what you will do for share by share basis. Now if I have 3-4 shares, I have shares of Infosys, I have shares of TCS, I have shares of some other 3-4 entities. I will identify for Infosys where the volume is higher, whether the volume is higher on the BSE or NSE. Then for the purpose of TCS, I'll see. Then for the purpose of the other as such, each and every equity shares, I'll see where the market is higher. Okay. So this is how you will decide the principal market. And in cases where the principal market is not available, you cannot identify where is higher level of volume. There is no comparable data itself. There is no such data available to identify or to compare market of each and every, or to compare volume of each and every market. In such cases, what to do? In such cases, you can see which is the most advantageous market. So the most advantageous market is the market in which you get a maximum amount for your asset and you get a least amount for the purpose of your liability. So this is the most advantageous market. Now the case might arise where suppose there is a principal market A and B. I'll take an example. So I'll just share my in that cases I'll just give you my example one more. I hope you can see my sheet. So for example, there is a market and there is a B market. Now in A and B market, the volume of B is higher. The volume of B is higher, but the price in market A is higher. What to do in that cases? Will you consider price as per B or will you consider price as per A? What will you do? In such cases, what you will do is, if you have a principal market where the volume is maximum, you won't see whether that price is advantageous or that price is not advantageous. So to take an example, for example, there is a commodity market. If there is a commodity market, I have a particular commodity to sell. But there is a, for example, suppose there is an iron commodity or there is some other commodity. Now there are two markets. I have MCX, which is a wholesale market, and I also have a retail market available to me. Now, logically, majority of activities or the volume in the wholesale market is very high. The volume in the wholesale market is very high, but the volume in the retail market is low. But if you see the price in retail market is high, but the price in the wholesale market is very low. What to do in that case? In such cases, you will ignore the retail market because the standard says that first you have to identify where the volume is highest. Once you identify where the volume is highest and you are able to identify such things, you will see the price as per that market itself, and you won't see whether that price is advantageous or not. So this is about the principal market and the most advantageous market. Moving ahead to the next point. What is market participant and what is the price? We'll refer to that concept. Now, market participant is a participant who has the knowledge about the market. So market participants are the buyers and the sellers in the market, or in the most advantageous market. They should be independent. They are not the related parties of the entity. If you define the price as per the related parties, you will get an absurd value for that particular transaction. They are knowledgeable. They are also knowledgeable and they are having an understanding of the asset. They are having an understanding about what condition the asset is into, what difference will the asset's location make, what are the restrictions attached to that asset. So everything is, the buyers are knowledgeable about all such circumstances, and you're not making a sale to a a buyer who is not having a knowledge about the asset. If today I go and sell a technology to a person who has never seen that technology, if today I go and sell a particular software to a person who is not aware about what information technology is, how a particular software works, he has not ever used such kind of technology, will he be able to assign a proper price to that asset? Obviously, no. How will I understand what is the peculiarity? If today I go and sell some artificial intelligence to a person who has never, or to a market of buyers who are into the commodity trading, they everyday trade goods such as iron, steel, oil. Now, who are into this business or such market cannot assign a proper value to an asset where you're selling a technology called as artificial intelligence for a particular asset. So that buyer should be a knowledgeable buyer. That buyer should be able to transact in that asset, and the buyer is willing to transact in that asset. What does it mean? You have not forced a particular buyer to transact into that asset. The buyer is willingly transacting into that asset. So these all conditions should be satisfied to decide who are the market participants. If either of these conditions is not satisfied, for example, if a market participant is a related party, in that cases, you will not consider that market participant as in your case for the purpose of valuation. To take an example, if I'm taking an example of, say, I want to value a particular land. Now, in the valuation of land, what I will see is, in my nearby area where I'm valuing that land, what kind of transactions have already taken place? If I've listed certain 3 to 5 transactions which have been already taken place. Now, when I'm listing such 3 to 5 transactions, I identify that there is one of the transaction which is just a transaction between the group companies. And in such transaction, which is a transaction between group companies, these two companies are related parties. So this price might influence the way in which I will value my land. So that transaction has to be ignored for the purpose of your fair valuation. Okay, so this is about the market participants. All the conditions should be satisfied to understand or to achieve the market participants. Now to move on to the second aspect is, what is the price? This we have discussed in our manner previously. So the price is nothing but the exit price of an asset, and it is not a transaction price. So what does a transaction price mean is, the transaction price is not a day-to-day transaction price in which you buy, again you can sell, again you can buy, again you can sell. It is not a trading of that asset. And the second part is, it is not an entry price. So nobody is gonna newly buy that particular asset. It's not a price of a new asset. Okay, so it is, remember, it is an exit price. Now, what exit price does not mean you're gonna sell off that particular asset and the buyer is taking it as a scrap value. It is not scrap for that particular buyer. So always remember a point, that exit price does not mean that asset will never be used. So exit price means, for example, if a life of a particular machinery is say 15 years, and I've already used that machinery for a particular 7 or to 8 years. Now, exit price is the price at which I can exit from that particular asset. The new buyer can buy that asset, and the new buyer is going to use that asset for the remaining useful life. So this is about the price that you will assign for that asset. Now remember, any kind of transaction cost will not be reduced from the fair valuation. So whatever, if today I have a property, today I have a plant and machinery which is located at my location, and I decide and I receive an exit price of say rupees 10 lakh. But to sell this plant and machinery, I had to give a commission to a commission agent, which amounts to 1% of the value of the transaction, or say 3%, whatever might be the percentage. So this 3% of the value of 10 lakhs, that is the 30,000, this 30,000 won't be reduced from the fair value of the asset already. So this is the case. This won't be reduced from the exit price decided, that is the fair value decided of that particular asset and liability. Now, but please understand, how did we decide which is the most advantageous market? In case of most advantageous market, you decided a market which gives a maximum value for that particular asset or liability. While determining the most advantageous market, you will deduct the transaction cost. Now you'll say, let's give an example for this. So I'll just open a Excel sheet and I'll give you an example. So just a moment. I hope you can see my Excel sheet. Now, when I'm just mentioning it over here, there is market A and there is market B. Now, the selling price in market A is 1,000 rupees and the selling price in market B is 1,200 rupees. Now, as per these two markets, the most advantageous market is say B, because the price in market B is very much higher. However, the transaction cost in market A is hardly rupees 10, whereas the transaction cost in market B is rupees 300 because it is located in a very remote location. So to identify which is the most advantageous market, you will deduct the transaction cost. And after deducting the transaction cost, you identified, or it came into your knowledge that market A is the most advantageous market. So for the purpose of determining which is the most advantageous market, you will deduct the transaction cost. Once you deduct the transaction cost and decide which is the market, which is the most advantageous market, the fair value as per Ind AS 113 in such cases is the price which is without deducting the transaction cost. Now the fair value of that particular asset is rupees 1,000. So I hope it is clear. For the purpose of deciding which is the most advantageous market, you will deduct the transaction cost, and after that, to decide what is the fair value, you will not adjust for the purpose of the transaction cost. So this is about the transaction cost. Now, in Ind AS 113, what they have said is, they have specified certain considerations for the purpose of non-financial assets. Now, non-financial assets means this will not be applicable to the assets which are fair valued in accordance with Ind AS 109, Ind AS 32 and Ind AS 107. So whichever assets you will classify as financial assets in accordance with the financial instrument standard, these considerations won't be applicable to such kind of assets. So what are such? This will be applicable only to non-financial assets. And non-financial assets means land, building, property, plant and equipment, plant and machinery, intangible assets, investment property. So such kind of assets are non-financial assets. Now what the standard is saying is, the asset or the buyer is gonna use the asset in a best form and best manner. If today I'm using a particular asset, say I'm using a building and I'm using it for my administrative purposes. Okay. If a particular other buyer is gonna set up his plant in that building, he might give a better value to that building because he's gonna put up his plant or whatever for that building. In such cases, it is assumed that the buyer is gonna make a best and highest possible use of that asset. So that is the thing is, So whatever is the best use of the, irrespective of the fact that I am not using that asset for that particular manner. So this is how the buyer will make the best and the highest possible use. Now, for example, if I have a land, take another example. I have a land. Today I have developed a garden on that land. Okay, there is an area of say 500 square feet, or there is an area of 1000 square feet. Now, on that 1000 area of a vacant land, I have developed a garden, and that is getting being used by the common people as a for the purpose of their general purpose. It is being getting used. Now, there is a buyer who is going to construct a residential property on that area. Now, tell me, just the fact that I am not using the land, or that land is not getting used for constructing a residential property, and it is just used for the purpose of developing a garden, will you value that land as if the garden will be continued for 100 years? No. You will have to see that what is the best and highest possible use of that asset from a market participant's perspective. You cannot say that now if that land is located, to continue that example further, that land is located in a residential area. In such area, residential building itself will be the best and highest possible use. Now you would say, why not development or construction of a factory will be best and highest possible use? Because it is a residential area. The residential area or that particular members or the people in that particular area will never allow constructing a factory in that location. That is why the highest and best use is by constructing a residential property in that area, and not by continuing that land for the purpose of just creating a garden out of that land. So this is how you determine, and this is purely for the non-financial assets. Okay. Then when you decide which is the best and the highest possible use, you have to see whether it is physically possible in that area, whether it is legally permissible, and whether it is financially feasible. If particular activity is not legally permissible itself, irrespective of the fact that it is very much profitable to do that activity in such area, you will not consider it. For example, if a land is an agricultural land, you cannot decide or you cannot come up to a conclusion that constructing an industry on that land is the best possible use, because legally an agricultural land cannot be used for industrial purposes. Unless that agricultural land is converted into a non-agricultural land and be allowed for industrial purposes, you cannot consider that constructing an industry on that land is the best possible use. So this is about the how to decide for what purposes the asset would be used. Just to assume that whatever the entity is using and however the entity is using that asset, the asset would be continued to be used in the same manner is not the assumption to be used for the purpose of deciding the fair value. Please understand the background. This standard has given principles attached for the purpose of fair valuation. Nobody can give you a strict guideline or a strict set of rules of how to decide the fair value. Any standard can provide a guidance about how to decide the fair value of a particular asset or a liability. Okay, so this is about how a particular or which kind of special considerations are given for a non-financial asset. Moving ahead to the next part, what are the valuation techniques? There are 3 methods of valuation given under this standard. Before that, let's understand what are the valuation techniques worldwide, or what are the commonly accepted world valuation techniques. So you know DCF, that is discounted cash flow method. You know what is a book value approach. So book value is nothing but purely assets and liabilities, whatever are appearing in a books of accounts is a book value method. Then there is an adjusted book value method. Okay. Then there is a market value. So whatever is appearing in the market, that is your approach. Then third market will be a P multiple approach. So the price earnings multiple approach is one of the method. Then you will say multiple of EPS. So only the earnings multiple is used for the purpose of valuation. There are various methods which are commonly used for the purpose of valuation. But here the standard has given only 3 methods which are the accepted methods for the purpose of valuation. So which are these 3 methods? These 3 methods are the market approach, the income approach, and the cost approach. So what does this mean? Let's go one by one. The market approach means using the prices or other relevant information that is available in the market as a whole. It can be for that identical asset or for such comparable assets. So if there is a market available and if you have an identical asset price, then that can be considered as a market price, or it can be for a comparable assets or liabilities or a particular group of assets and liabilities. Now, to give an example, if I'm valuing shares of a listed company, it is very simple in such case. You will go to the market, you will identify what are the shares of the listed company, what is the fair value appearing on NSE or BSE. You will decide where the volume is higher. For example, if the volume is higher on NSE, then you will consider that market price as a price because you have used the market approach for the purpose of such valuation. Very simple. The market approach is very simple. Or it can be, for example, I'm valuing a particular share of a company. When I'm valuing the share of the company, that company is not listed. That company is not listed. So I'm finding out a comparable company, which is a listed company, and I'm using those parameters for the purpose of valuation. Now, please understand, in such cases, you cannot use the market price of a listed company as it is. You can just use the parameters of a particular listed company. Suppose a PE multiple of that industry. You can see what is the PE multiple of that industry, and you can just take it as a comparison purposes or for the purpose of comparable assets and liabilities. And you cannot take it as it is. It just can be one of the approach for the purpose of your fair valuation. Now, please understand one more fact. It is not necessary that you have to value the assets or liabilities only using one particular approach. You can value it considering 2 approaches, 3 approaches. You can assign weight to that particular approaches. This is always allowed. I can always take particular market approach. I can take the considerations given in that market approach and use for the purpose of my valuation. This has been allowed by the standard. And one more basic fundamental remember is the highest importance is given to observable inputs. So what does observable inputs mean? Observable input means, suppose for example, a market input. So if a price is as per the listed company of a listed company, it is as per NSE or BSE, here it is very much assured. You have assurity on that price given. So the more the observable inputs in a particular valuation, the higher is the reliance placed on that valuation. The lesser are the observable inputs. What does it mean? There are more non-observable inputs in the valuation. The lesser is the reliability on that valuation. So you should just ensure there are more observable inputs in your valuation. And second approach. What is the second approach? Income approach. So what does income approach mean? Very simple. It is as good as a discounted cash flow method. So what do you do in discounted cash flow method? In discounted cash flow method, you discount the future values into a single current value, which is the market value for that particular, which is the fair value for that under that approach, under the income approach. So you list down the cash flows. You list down the cash flows, you discount that cash flows, and whatever is the present value of that cash flows, it is the fair value of the company. Now, when you are using the income approach, there are various things that you have to factor in. If there is any, you have to consider the factors for how much is the company liquidable. Is it easily liquidable? If there are 2 companies, one is a listed company and one is a non-listed company, and you have to value under the income approach. If exactly the business is same, all the financials are same, everything is same, assume for a time being. But just because this company is a listed company, the liquidation of this company is very much easy. Whereas the liquidation of this particular company is not easy. That thing you have to factor in. Then this information about this data can be reliably achieved. Whereas the information about the unlisted company cannot be reliably received. The buyers for this company cannot be reliably received. So this is about the income approach. Then additionally, what you have to factor in, when you will decide the discounting factor of the company, you will also factor in how much are the risks attached for that particular company. If the company is more riskier, you will use an increased discount rate. If the company is less risky, you will use a lesser or you will use a lesser value of discount rate. Why so? You have to factor in your risk in your discount rate, and at that discount rate, you will discount the future cash flows. So this is about the market and the income approach. Moving ahead to the next part, which is the cost approach. Now, please remember or please understand, cost approach does not mean whatever was the cost or whatever was the historical cost of that asset or liability. No, never a particular standard. You refer to any valuation standard, you refer to generally accepted valuation techniques, you refer to any valuation techniques. Nobody would give an emphasis on the cost approach, which is their book value at cost or at historical cost. Nobody will give any reliance on that particular approach. It can be used just as a basis, but it will never be the best valuation technique. So what is the cost approach as per Ind AS 113? A valuation technique that refers the amount that would be recovered or that amount that will be required currently to replace the existing asset. So this approach is nothing but a replacement cost approach. In short, if I have this particular machinery, if this has to be replaced with the similar amount of, with a similar capacity of machinery, then what will be the amount required? Please understand a fact, if my machinery is 10-year-old, then I will also consider the replacement value of a machinery which is 10-year-old, or I will discount for the factor that this machinery is 10-year-old. So for example, if I have a current machinery, which at that point in time I had purchased at 10 lakh rupees, and then I depreciated it for the period of 10 years, then the value today is say 5 lakh rupees. Okay. Now I will see what if I go and replace this asset. If I go and buy a new asset, but new asset which should be 10-year-old. In that case, how much will be the value of that asset? That will be the value under the cost approach. Now, obviously, as I said earlier, you can use multiple methods. You can give one, if you have income approach as well as cost approach, you can say assign weight of 3 to income approach and you can assign weight of 1 to the cost approach. And eventually your fair value will be weighted average of income approach and the cost approach. Okay. Now, the general principles that have been laid by the standard is, you have to keep in mind that you have the sufficient data for the purpose of fair valuation. If you don't have the sufficient data, then this fair value cannot be considered as a reliable technique. Second is, you should have the majority of observable inputs. You have to maximize the observable inputs and minimize the unobservable inputs. So, as I said it earlier, your unobservable input should be the minimum. Now, these are only the 3 methods allowed. So, in short, any method other than this 3 method will not be considered as a method or will not be considered as valuation in accordance with Ind AS 113. So, go back to the companies. If you have audited any kind of Ind AS companies, if you have been part of any kind of Ind AS companies, then please see which was the valuation technique used. What is the valuation technique that they have used? So, if they have used a valuation technique as a net book value approach, then that method was never allowed. That is not in accordance with 113. If they have used a cost method or a historical cost method, that is purely absurd results given and which is not an approach allowed as per Ind AS 113. So, as an auditor, your responsibility is not just to receive a valuation report from a valuer. You will also have to understand which approach has been used by that valuer, whether that approach is in accordance with Ind AS 113 or not. And only if that approach is also in accordance with 113, only then you will accept that valuation in accordance with standard and you will audit and you will certify that the valuation has been carried in accordance with Ind AS 113. I hope it is clear. I hope the approaches are clear. Whoever have already done the valuation courses, they would be well versed with what kind of approaches are there in totality and what kind of approaches are allowed by the standard. So this is there about the approaches allowed by the standard. Now let's move ahead. what is a fair value hierarchy. Now, fair value hierarchy. If you would have gone through any kind of annual reports of listed companies who are under Ind AS, you might have noticed that they always disclose level 1 disclosures under level 1, level 2, level 3, or valuation techniques or valuation hierarchy as level 1 hierarchy, level 2 hierarchy, level 3 hierarchy. What does it mean? Why do they mention level 1, level 2, level 3? And why do you have to classify each and every valuation under these levels? So let's understand this in accordance with what has been said under Ind AS 113. Now, moving ahead, if you have a quoted price which is unadjusted for any form, you had the identical item, that identical item had a quoted price, and you have used that price as it is. Okay, it might be from the principal market or it might be from the most advantageous market. In such cases, it is been said that the valuation is classified under level 1 because this is of you have the most reliable value under this level 1. So in short, whatever you will see is if your particular asset is valued as per level 1, highest reliability can be placed in that asset because they have used a market price which is unadjusted for anything. It is just a quoted price of that particular asset, and that will be value assigned to that asset. So in short, if you have a share of a listed company, equity shares, in that cases, that is a fair valuation which is under the level 1 criteria, level 1 category. Moving ahead, if you have adjusted the price, if you have adjusted a quoted price for certain other aspects, so these aspects are not a lot in nature. Now I'll give you an example. You have mutual funds. Now mutual funds is nothing but they take the quoted prices of the shares. They make a weight given to that shares. So if you have 10% of Infosys, you have 20% of some other company. They take the quoted value, they assign these weights, and then they derive onto the value. Then it deducts certain costs of the mutual funds, and then that is the NAV of that mutual funds. Now, is mutual fund purely a quoted unadjusted price? No, it is not a quoted unadjusted price. But this was a price adjusted. This was an adjusted price. However, whatever adjustments you have made were not significantly unobservable. So you have made adjustments, but these are not very much unobservable in nature. These are observable adjustments. Okay, then the valuation is under the level 2 valuation. Now level 2 valuation means it is of a second priority. So the first priority you give to the level 1 valuations and second priority you go to the level 2 valuations. Now in cases where these two are not there, so it is neither a quoted price, neither it was with the minimal adjustments to the quoted price, then it is a level 3 valuation. Now please understand, level 3 is given a third priority. Now, since level 1 is the most reliable method and level 3 is the least reliable method, or you give a less importance if it is under level 3. Why? Because the users can make any adjustments in accordance with him. You won't understand also what kind of adjustments were made. In such cases, highest amount of disclosures are required in accordance in case the valuation is under level 3, and the least disclosures are required if the valuation is under level 1 hierarchy. This is the hierarchy. You have to mention this level 1, level 2, level 3 hierarchy in your annual report also. In your significant accounting policies, you will have to mention what is level 1, what is level 2, what is level 3. What are falls under level 1, level 2, level 3. So if you have quoted shares, it will fall under level 1. If you have mutual funds, it will fall under level 2. If you have any other assets for which these two are not applicable, it will fall under level 3. Okay. After this session, please go and read a certain annual report of a listed company. Then you will understand all these concepts in a detailed manner. Further, we will also understand what are the disclosures required under the standard. Now, under this standard, on a primary basis, you will have to disclose in your significant accounting policies how is the valuation carried, What are the parameters used for the valuation and what are the levels of hierarchy used for the purpose of valuation? What additional is required? Whenever you carry a valuation for any particular asset which might be financial in nature or non-financial in nature, then in such cases you have to also mention what are the valuation techniques used, what were inputs given for that valuation, okay, whether this is recurring or non-recurring measurement. So whatever are the inputs, in short, you have to give a brief about everything. How was the valuation carried? What are the inputs? Whether it is measurable or whether it is frequent, whether it is not frequent. Everything you will have to mention in your notes to the accounts. So always you will see a note called as fair value measurement in the financial statements of the entity. Then you'll also have to see that what is the impact or what is the effect in the statement of profit and loss and other comprehensive income. That also will mention in the notes to accounts. Now, to go ahead, you'll also have to see whether the what you call the whether there was any change between the hierarchies. Whether a particular asset you had measured previously in accordance with level 3, and now you have to move a particular asset from level 3 to level 2. Is such cases happened? Are such cases happened? If there are such cases happen, then you will also have to write it in your annual report that there are certain movement from level 3 to level 2. So let's take an example. So for example, I will download an annual report of a particular company. For example, KPIT Technologies Limited, I will download. It is a listed company. Everybody can see my screen, I hope. Whenever I show a disclosure for from any annual report, it becomes more clear. That is why I showed a disclosure from annual reports. Just a moment, just give me a moment. I'll take off 1780 because there was a merger that occurred in KPIT. Or I'll take off some other company. I'll take off Praj Industries Limited. Just a moment, everyone. I'm just downloading the report. So till then, we'll continue till the report is downloaded. Okay, fine. We'll continue ahead and then we'll discuss it. Okay, no problem. Let's move ahead. Okay, the report is downloaded. Now, I hope you can see my screen where I have opened the annual report of Praj Industries Limited. So let's go to the disclosures given by the company. Everybody can see the screen. This is rather significant. In the significant accounting policies, what do you give? I'll just show it. Where they might have given it in the notes to accounts. We'll just go to that note. I hope you can see the annual report that I've shared. And I'll go to the notes to the financial statements. Now over here, if you can see that there is a note of fair value measurement. I hope you can see the annual report. So wherever the fair value measurement is required as per the standard, they have classified in accordance with Ind AS 113. You can see over here financial assets leveled at level 2. So each and every fair valuation you have to level. You cannot skip a particular leveling of assets. Now whatever they have done, investment in shares, that is there over here. It might not be this thing. Investment in quoted perpetual bonds, investment in deposits, investment in NSE certificates. These all they are classified under level 2. Then they have classified it under level 1 kind of assets. They have classified the liabilities under level 2. So this is kind of classification given in accordance with this standard for this annual report company. This is how you disclose for each and every statement or for each and every caption you have to disclose the fair value in your annual report. And if there is any movement between two particular leveling, then you all have to disclose that also in your annual report. And this was about Ind AS 113. And I hope everybody has understood this standard and how to value under this standard. Then I hope the valuation people who are going to give the exam under valuation also have understood what to do. Now they have, you have certain MCQs for your valuation, which have been given as an illustrative MCQs. That also you will understand after you have gone through the standard. I hope I have covered everything. You will be able to understand or you will be able to deliver for those MCQs also.